You're listening to Mark of the Maker. Hey everybody, I'm Mark Steiner and you're listening to Mark of the Maker. This is episode 91 of the show, and we have an excellent guest to join us this week. We'll get to that in just a minute. We're a podcast with myself and three knife maker friends who do this thing every couple weeks. We have with us Mr. Sean Kendrick.
Hey, hey.
We have Mr. Tom Krein.
Hello. How's everyone?
And we have Mr. Michael Birch.
Hello.
I'm not sure why I say Michael.
I don't either.
Is that like me trying to have the southern accent thing? Michael.
It's weird, but I just try not to say anything about it.
It's very kind of you. I don't say Sean.
Because my name ain't spelled Sean.
That's right. That's a good point. We need to thank our friends who support us through Patreon. Patreon is a website where you can pledge a little money every month to help support creative causes of your choice. And we have something there where folks can support Mark of the Maker. It's at patreon.com, patreon.com. If you search Mark of the Maker, you can find us and you can see what it's all about. So high five to everyone who supports us through Patreon. It's much appreciated. It helps us keep the lights on and keep microphones in motion and replace equipment when it breaks, which happens all the time. And we really appreciate you guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.
We also are supported by our friend George Palagonia at American Metal Exchange. George is a seller, vendor, whatever you want to call it, of fancy knife-making materials. Everything from titanium to damasteel to zirconium to... He's got mokume and mokutai and stuff like that too, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's got it all.
He's got
All
it
the good stuff.
all. That's right. So if you need knife-making materials, please hit up George at amxinc.com. That's amxinc.com. And thanks, George. We appreciate you sticking with us. It's been quite a run now. So we appreciate you, man.
Oh, man.
Very much so.
So like I mentioned, we have an excellent guest with us. He's probably smirking to himself like, yeah, excellent. And that is Mr. Kirby Lambert. Welcome to Mark of the Maker, Kirby.
Hey, thanks so much, guys.
Yeah.
Hey, Kirby.
Good to be here.
Yeah, it'll be a good conversation. Kirby's, I think, got an interesting story and can tell us about kind of how he got into making knives. Kirby's been doing it a long time. Sometimes we all find ourselves scratching our heads a little bit like, wait a second, how long have I been doing this again?
Mm-hmm.
So we'll get into some of that too. But so Kirby, we're going to go way back, man. Hop in the way back machine. Let's talk about where were you born? Where'd you grow up? That kind of what was your youth time of your life like?
Well, I grew up. I was born in 1975, and
You're not
crazy.
required to give your age, Kirby.
Well, you can wipe that off the.
Okay, no, not yet.
You can edit that out then. But I grew up in a small town called Wynyard in Saskatchewan, Canada. It's a small town of 2,100 people, surrounded by lots of lakes and just some of the most amazing fishing and hunting. And I grew up doing a lot of camping with my parents. They would take us. My dad was a teacher, so summers were spent doing a lot of camping and road trips and stuff like that. And and as getting into the knife thing happened really early for me. I would say as far back as I remember, like being 5 years old, and there's always like jackknives and pocket knives and stuff like that in drawers in the house, and camping and skinning branches and going and finding the perfect marshmallow roasting stick and
That's a critical thing when you're camping.
yeah. So yeah, that I like I said, it was a small town, so it was the kind of thing where you could just hop on your bike and cruise out into the bushes or out of town, and no real worries at all. Cause I mean, like now it's crazy for me to think back now having kids and living in the city, and it's like, man, I can't believe I did that. And my kid's older than me and he's not allowed to do anything. So,
yes. Yeah. You're probably like us. It sounds like Kirby, where like, you know, bye mom, you take off after breakfast and maybe not see her again till lunch or dinner or whatever happened, sunset or something.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
So small town, how far north?
I'm trying to, we're fairly close to the border. It's pretty much right above like, Montana, North Dakota.
Yeah.
Borderline in there. And then probably a few hours up north of there.
Okay.
But
what was the name of the town again where you grew up?
Wynyard, Saskatchewan.
Wynyard. Okay. Yeah, I'm looking at a map. It must be small because it doesn't show up right away.
Yeah, it's like I said, there's like 2,100 people, and now I live in Regina, which is, I don't know, an hour and 45 minutes away from there. But
right,
if you look on the map, if you're looking on the map, it's the capital city is where we live now. So
yeah,
which is still a small city. I think it's like 180,000 people or something.
Right. So your parents, Kirby, were they like regular working folks, or did what your parents do have anything to do with kind of your path in life?
It's funny because not really. My dad, like I said, he was a school teacher, and my mom was a teacher as well. And then when she had me and my brother, she was a stay-at-home mom, and never went back to teaching after. Just sort of worked. She worked in the bakery and stuff like that in town. But like both my brother and I talk about how we both grew up like playing guitar and listening to certain music and this kind of stuff. Whereas my parents I don't ever really remember on any of our trips even listening to the radio so much, let alone playing instruments or anything like that. And I really I've always enjoyed like drawing and sculpture, like anything sort of artistic. And whereas my dad, he was kind of not into any of that kind of stuff at all. My mom, I guess, was into art, I guess, a little bit, but as far as like even having tools at the house, like we never really had much of anything. And when I was first getting into making knives or just wanting to make anything, it was like starting from scratch and trying to, learn from other friends who had dads who worked at muffler shops or this or that. And it's like, oh, cool. Well, that's kind of how you do this and that. And so we're kind of opposites, my brother and I, from our parents in a lot of ways. So how I ended up doing what I do it's quite baffling to me, actually.
Yeah. All around, I guess. Right.
So what made you want to make things, as a kid? I assume you like to tinker and dabble and stuff like that, if that's, that's kind of how we all get into that. So if they didn't do that, what was your first kind of, I guess, feeling that you wanted to try to tinker around with stuff?
Yeah, I think it all goes back to Shokasugi ninja movies, which I was exposed to at a very young age, which is going back and watching some of them now. It's kind of disturbing that kids are just, wearing ninja suits and watching these pretty horrific movies and stuff. But at the time, like, I don't know, it's just funny because everyone's like, oh, you can't expose kids to this or that, or it's going to make them crazy and stuff. But I mean, I look back at all the stuff that I was into as a very young kid, and I was just like, wow, I can't imagine letting my kids watch certain things.
Exactly.
But that's what all started it for me, was like seeing the martial arts, and especially like the ninja movie type stuff, and ninja swords and stars and grappling hooks, and it probably all started when I was maybe like 6 or 7 years old. I remember even watching like Conan the Barbarian and stuff like that. And just seeing swords and thinking swords were so cool. And a buddy of mine, his older brother had this busted old down car sitting in their driveway, and it was all smashed up. So we were pulling like all the chrome parts off it and putting handles on them. And next thing you know, we have all these swords, and then finding Dad's old belt and taping it all up and making a scabbard for it and running around and, I don't know, having sword fights and stuff like that. So that's kind of how it all started. And it's kind of even the way it is today. Is like, it's, that kind of stuff is just, I just love going back and looking at clips of old ninja movies and things, and still make the odd throwing stars and whatnot. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's very familiar for a lot of the makers we talk to, and a lot of us even.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
It's amazing the influence pop culture has on all of this stuff, right? I mean, like Michael said, we've had so many knife maker interviews where inevitably we talk about movies because they're such an influence on most people, right? I mean, they expose you to something and then it's like, ooh, that's super cool. I want to do something with that, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's just get interested in it or be inspired by it or sent off in a direction, who knows, right? But yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of how it all started. And then I think I was about, I don't know, maybe like probably around grade 7 or so, that a friend of mine, his dad owned the muffler shop in town, and his dad was always building dune buggies and go-karts and everything. And one day my buddy came over and he had this like towel all wrapped up, and he's like, check this out. And he unravels it. And he had this knife that he and his dad had been making together, and it didn't have a handle or anything on it yet, but I just remember seeing the blade, and it was like, I was like, whoa, like that's like beyond next level compared to ripping chrome parts off of cars and taping handles to them and stuff like that. And I remember just instantly, I was like, I want to do that. Like, that's the coolest thing. And I'd always sort of dreamt of it as a kid, but at that time I was like, this is now kind of real, and there's an actual like knife, not just a prop type thing. And so that's kind of what was sort of like the next, that sort of planted the seed, and the seed started to kind of grow. And then it was probably within a couple years after that, was right around that time as well. I don't know. Again, this is where I'm going to probably start rambling off about going in a million directions, but it's all going to kind of tie together in certain things. But so it was like probably right around grade 8 that, I don't know, it seemed like for most of my friends, it was like sort of the time when you start getting passionate about certain things, whether it be football or hockey or, whatever. And for myself and a lot of my friends, it was skateboarding. And so skateboarding, snowboarding, things like that. And so I was still, the knife thing, as soon as I saw that first knife, I was like, oh, I want to do that. But for us, grade 7 to 12 is high school. I don't know, for a lot of other, like even here in the city, it's usually 9 to 12. But
right. And
so in shop class in high school, I think once you get to grade 9, one of the projects in the metalworking thing was to build a knife. And
really,
yeah.
What? Wow.
Yeah.
Nice.
But I dropped out of shop before I got to make the knife or whatever. I actually think it was grade 10, because I think grade 9, yeah, it must have been about grade 10. And I just remember thinking like, oh, I can't wait to, get to the metal shop and start making knives. And then like I said, I ended up dropping out and not getting to make the knife. But so we started getting a lot more into the whole skateboarding thing. And the one thing, I'll go back a bit, you were talking a bit about my parents and stuff. The one thing they were for us, for myself and my brother, was that they were like always the most supportive parents like ever. Like, I just remember anything I kind of was showing interest in, they would just, whether they like stuff that they had no interest in, I'm sure, like ninja movies and stuff like that, but as soon as they saw, they're like, oh, like, you're like martial arts and stuff. And so my dad was he would always be like, well, growing up in the small town you have a couple stores and a gas station kind of thing and a post office. But if you ever wanted to do anything like martial arts or anything like that, that was like, well, you got to go to the city for that, which is a 2-hour drive away. And so he's like, well, why don't you get on the phone and just call one of them and see if they'll maybe send somebody out. And if you get enough kids here that are interested in it, it'll be worth their drive. And I was just thought, well, like, really, like, doesn't that seem like a hassle? He's like, oh no, there's no harm in trying. And you should, if you want to do it, like, that's kind of your only option. And so I remember calling them and this martial arts place, and they're like, well, how many people and whatever. And the next thing you know, there's like, we had kung fu classes and stuff like that. And then with the skateboarding thing, it was the same type deal, where after a year or so, we were starting to get pretty good and stuff like that. And so kids are breaking boards all the time, but none of us had our driver's license yet. So it was always like, oh, now we got to wait for somebody's parents to drive to the city and pick stuff up. So I remember my dad saying, like, why don't you call up one of these skateboard places and see if they'll ship stuff to you and you can sell to the kids in town here and stuff. And
wow.
And I was like, well, that seems bizarre, but I was like, oh, whatever, give it a shot. So at the time, my favorite company was Powell Peralta. And I don't know if you guys grew up skateboarding at all or anything.
Yeah.
But Powell was kind of like one of the biggest companies at that time. And so they said, oh yeah, well, call up Kevin Harris in Vancouver, BC, and he runs our Canadian distributorship. And I was like, Kevin Harris. I'm like, wow, he's like on the Bones Brigade. And I'm like I said, I was in grade 8 at the time and just freaking out. So I called him up and he was like, well, I'll get back to you in a minute or in the next couple of days and we'll figure this out. And so he called me back and he's like, okay, I'll tell you what, if you place like a $500 order first time, then we'll ship to you and you can be like like you can have your shop or whatever. And so I was like, wow. So I'm in grade 8 and having the skate shop in my mom and dad's basement. And I'm just like, I get this catalog of like all the decks and the clothes and the shoes. And so my buddy at the time, he's like, well, you need a cool skate shop name. And I was like, well, how am I going to think of this? Like, and it was in my parents' furnace room. So he's like, oh, it's got to be Inferno Skates. And I was like, okay. So Inferno Skates. And so the reason I'm kind of going through all this is that, so when I started getting into the knife thing, the very first model I ever did was the Inferno. And that was kind of like tied into based on like going back to all that. So yeah, it was a crazy time. And so then I kind of grew up, I got really into the skateboard thing. And then after a couple of years of doing that, we had a couple skate parks that we ran where we'd get like everybody in town, like there's the pizza place in town. We'd go and talk to them and they're like, well, we'll donate this many pizzas if you guys want to have a contest. And then the paper would come and write about it. And it was kind of like, there was really nothing in the small town, but it was always like, if you wanted to do it, you'd have to go create like your own fun. But it was kind of my parents that were always like, well, you can do, like, I was always like, oh, imagine like, like skate contests and skate parks. And they're just like, well, just do it then. Like, don't just sit and go, oh, it'd be nice to be in the city, do that. Like, do that here. And so as we got older, it was, then it was playing, and it was right around grade 8 as well. I started playing guitar. And so we started just goofing around and playing in bands. And then next thing you know, we'd be having like these festival things. And then people from the cities would be coming up, and any abandoned building, we'd just set up at one night or rent a hall out. And there'd be like, a few hundred people like just partying and all kinds of bands playing. And we created our whole own scenes. And it was just such an amazing time. And a lot of my buddies and I always look back on all that and just be like, I can't believe we did all that. Like, because anybody that was like my brother's a few years older and stuff, like nobody did anything like that. And so it was just kind of this thing that happened. And now it's like we go back and there's just tumbleweeds blowing through town. And it's like, man, do you remember like, like when we used to do this on the weekend, you couldn't even find a parking spot downtown. And now you go on there on a weekend, you see like one car parked somewhere and stuff. But And so then from playing in bands, it was probably around grade 10. And at this time I was like, still, I loved the whole knife thing. I just, as far as making stuff, it was probably around grade 9, grade 10 that I met a buddy of mine named Rob Waite, who we played in bands together and stuff. And I remember going out to his place one night to play guitar or whatever. And I looked in on his wall and he had this big sword. And I was like, no way, where did you get that? And he's like, well, I made that. And I was like, what? Are you kidding? I'm like, well, how did you do it? And he's like, well, that's made from a saw blade or I can't remember if it was a saw blade or a big file or something like that. And he's like, I just forged it out in a forge. And I was like, no way, a forge? Like that's crazy. I totally want to, I'd love. And so he's the kind of the one that he had the first knife magazine I ever saw. He showed me. And so he started telling me, like I said, well, how did you grind the bevels on it and stuff? And he's like, well, you use like a belt grinder. He's like, I used, files and whatever, but he goes, like we were looking through this knife magazine. It's like, well, you grind on a belt grinder. It's like, wow, I had no idea you'd grind that on a belt grinder. And so he and I went out and bought I think it was maybe like a Black & Decker 4x36 inch disc grinder with a belt combo kind of thing. Yeah. And we just sit in his basement and you put just the slightest bit of pressure and it just stalls the thing out. So we'd sit there all day just grinding out these blades out of and so that was probably it would have been about grade 9 when I first started, end of grade 9, beginning of grade 10, that I first started actually grinding blades and learning a bit more about it. And then on a snowboard trip one winter that right around that time, I bought my first knife magazine for the drive up to the mountains or whatever. And it was fighting knives. Yeah. And on the cover, I think it was like a purple cover. And I think it was Scott Slobodian and Don Poltzine. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but they did the Japanese swords and stuff like that. And I was just like, that's what I'm going to do. I'm like that as a kid going back, seeing all these ninja movies. And I'm like, that looks exactly like in the ninja movies, but 1,000 times better. Cause it's not like a movie prop. It's an actual amazing piece of art. And so that's when I got totally hooked. And then it was every month, go out and buy whatever knife magazines you could find. There was always Blade and there was fighting knives, and I'm trying to remember what else there was, but so then that's when I came back home to my, I was talking with my parents and I said, I really want to start forging stuff, but I don't know anything about it. And so they started talking to people around town and old blacksmiths and stuff that were still there. And so we got a bit of information there. And then again, my dad, he saw me getting an interest in this. So he went to the library. And at that time, there's nothing on knife making. I didn't even know there were actual knife makers. And he found a few books that I started reading, and I was just like, oh, that looks so cool. But I just couldn't wrap my head around what kind of, it's just how to go about. I just wanted someone to show me something. Right. And so then we found a guy named Al Baki who ran a rock shop. And so he had all kinds of lapidary equipment and metal detecting equipment. And he also made knives and was a part of the blacksmith guild. And there's a bunch of stuff. So we met him and he was just a total character. So my buddy, Rob Waite, and I, he's the guy that really sort of helped me get into the whole knife thing. He and I would go to the city and just listen to this guy talk for hours about he's just a total character and just such an awesome guy. And we started buying knife supplies from him, and he would explain to us how to grind them. And he goes, and you bring, here, buy this and grind a blade and bring it back to me and I can heat treat it for you. And so we did a little bit of that, but the thing that I was again, I was really wanting to make swords. And so he being with the blacksmith guild, he said, we got these guys who can get all this 5160 and stuff. And so Rob and I started forging out like wakizashis and stuff like that out of 5160. And it was probably around grade, I'm guessing it would have been like maybe like grade 11 or something like that. There was a gun show in Saskatoon, and I remember we like bashed away at these, like they're pretty crude, but they cut really well. But I know that they couldn't have been too pretty, but we had little business cards printed up, and we're like, oh, we're going to be at this gun show. And so we had a bunch of different forged stuff out there. And I remember having this wakizashi, and it was like someone bumped the table and it kind of went to fall. So I went to grab it, and it sliced like both my palms like wide open. And it was just this hot and red blood. And I was like, oh, and of course at the time we didn't have any kind of cases or pouches. Everything was just wrapped in towels. So thankfully we had lots of towels, and I just sat there and I put my hands under the table and I'm just clenching it, and it's this towel's just turning red. And Rob was like, he's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I kind of hold this towel up, and he's like, and he was like, he's like, that's not good. And so I remember sitting there going like, I was so excited to be here. Now I should probably be in the hospital getting stitched up. But I think we sold a few pieces there and stuff. There was some bear hunter. He's like, oh, I'd love to have something like this. Would be perfect for chopping whatever. And so we did that for a couple of years. And then it was, I think right out of high school, I was like, I really want to know more about like finishing and a bit more about tools and what kind of grinders and stuff. Cause like I said, there was no YouTube or websites or anything. So it was just kind of like certain people telling you things, but lots of contradiction in the way people did things. So
yeah,
I thought I'm going to take like this knife course. There was a guy by the name of Bill Schiller who was quite well known in this area. He made all kinds of hunting knives and stuff like that. And so he would put on courses every once in a while. And so I took this course where you just make like a hunting knife, I guess. And I had no interest in that style of knife because it was like right at that time. I remember seeing Emerson and Greg Lightfoot were kind of the two guys that really stuck out in my mind as far as like if I'm going to make, if I'm not making swords, I want to be making something like that. Not like I growing up here, it's kind of amazing that I never got into hunting, but like every single one of my friends is huge into hunting. I love to fish and stuff, but the hunting thing was just, I guess, like I said, like with my parents, they weren't into hunting and stuff. And any of my other buddies, that it was like all their parents kind of got them into it. But anyway, so
hey, Kirby, you're when you mention Lightfoot and Emerson, that's from your exposure through magazine stuff, or had you seen their work in person by then?
I had never seen anybody's stuff in person till like many years later, but that was just through knife magazines. Fighting Knives, I think, was the one.
Yep.
I think there was a thing with Lightfoot, Emerson, and maybe even Elishewitz might have been in that article or something. And I just remember seeing those guys, and I'm just like, wow, that's like next level cool to me. Like I love the Japanese sword stuff, and I thought for sure like that's what I wanted to do. But the thing that started getting me more into knives was partly because I realized how hard it was to make swords, and I thought I should maybe start a little smaller and work my way up, if anything. And but just the style, like it was always my whole sort of growing up was either seeing something in a ninja movie or like a hunting knife, and the hunting knife thing it didn't really, I don't know, like I love that kind of stuff, but it was not until I saw the whole tactical, when it was like,
right,
G10 titanium and carbon fiber, it was just something that was I'd never seen before. And it just like being a kid seeing a ninja sword for the first time, I was like, wow, that's like so different and just really speaks to me. And I thought that was something I'd like to do. So I was taking this knife course, and I thought it'd be so cool to take a course from this guy, and I could learn to make like some tactical whatever knife. And of course I got to the course, and it was like this, like a hunting knife. And I was like, oh, okay, well, at least, but it was so valuable to me in that was the first time I'd really seen anybody grind a knife and how to polish a knife properly and all that kind of stuff. And so I took from that course, it was just like, okay, I got all the ideas of like how to put one together, but design wise, I'm going to totally try and I just had I want to go a totally different direction, but,
you're getting building blocks.
Yeah. So, and that again, so that would have been like grade 12. So like 1993, I believe. And then that was a time when next thing you know, it's like all my buddies are like, oh, well, okay. We're, like 2 hours prior, we're at the skate park and doing all this stuff and skateboarding. And then they're like, okay, well, we're moving away to go into university. And I'm just like, what? I'm like, when did everybody just sort of grow up, And I'm like, I don't want to, I have no interest in school. I just love playing guitar, skateboarding and making knives, which I mean, and now like, fast forward a number of years and it's kind of still all the same with a little bit less skateboarding.
Right.
but yeah. So, sorry, this is where I was saying I'm going to probably start rambling and
no, it's all
going in a million different directions. So, but then, So like I was saying with all my friends kind of like, okay, well, see you later. Like we're doing this and it's sort of the next chapter of their life. And I was just like, man, I don't know what I want to do. I'm enjoying so much what I'm doing.
I
running
like this chapter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't want to leave this. And, so I ended up working a few jobs around town. And like I said, growing up in a small town, there's not a lot to choose from. There's where I grew up, it was the chicken capital of Canada was always like the big sign outside the town. Wow. And so they had a big chicken plant there that basically like if you had ate chicken anywhere in Canada, like it basically came from this town. But everybody that worked there was missing fingers and it was a really tough, not so glamorous job, but the pay was always really great. But I was just like, I will never set foot in there. Like I just had zero interest in doing that. So there would always be different jobs coming up. There was a job where I worked at a museum, which for the summers where you'd just sit there and people would come in and passing through town would want like a map or something. We'd hand out maps and they'd kind of wander through and then you'd be sitting there for hours. And so I'd always just have my guitar and knife magazines and play guitar all day and, and dream about making knives once I got home from work. And,
right.
And, so kind of did that for a couple years.
Just as a level set, Kirby. So by that point, by the time you got to where you were finishing high school or close to finishing high school, were you and Rob still making stuff on that Black & Decker, like super basic tool stuff, or by that point had you graduated with equipment? Or
I guess no. So I would say it was probably. I'm trying to think here. So it would have been maybe around grade 11 or so. I remember my dad, he's like, saw us sitting there making dust for hours on this tiny little thing. And I said, someday I want to get a 2x72 belt grinder and blah, blah, blah. And so he took me into the city one day and bought me that. So I had a grinder, probably around in grade 11. And I still have the same grinder in my shop right now, that he had bought me. And then he would take me up to, after I took that knife course from Bill Schiller, he would take me up to Carrot River where he lived, which is about a 3-hour drive. And, every once in a while we'd go there to either get some stuff heat treated, but mostly just for me to pick Bill's brain and have him help me out with a bunch of questions and stuff that I'd had, trying to figure certain things out. So like I said, going back to like having parents that were always just incredible.
Yeah.
And so then I started buying equipment because Bill used to make a lot of grinders and buffing units and stuff. And so I had gotten a fair bit of equipment, but like I basically I had a really good buffing thing, a 2x72 grinder, a lap wheel, so sort of just the standard type stuff. So yeah, like I said, after high school, I started I was really, every minute was spent thinking like, oh, how can I make a better knife and make knives? And at this point, I still didn't think you could sell them and make any kind of living. I didn't know any of that was possible. But I just knew that that's all I dreamt of doing and wanted to do. So, but after a couple of years, I was just like, I don't know. I really don't know what I'm doing here, because I'm starting to get kind of older and I've never left small town. And so then I met a girl who was in town, like she actually was in the city here, but she was relatives of my friend Rob and stuff like that. And so we kind of got together over the summer one year, and she had to go back. She was doing a practicum here with whatever, and she was moving back to Calgary. And so I'm like, well, now this is going to be my way to get out of here. It's like, I'm just going to go to Calgary and find a job. And so I kind of followed her back home and started working around Calgary for a little bit. But then found that I was like, now I'm not really enjoying anything, and I don't have even like really a shop to work in or anything. So I'm sort of missing out on the whole knife thing. And so I moved back home for a little bit, and then I thought, well, I guess I should just, like, I'm not getting any younger, and it's starting to freak me out that I'm don't know what I still don't have any interest to go to university and sign up for like commerce or something. Like, that's not me. So
Yeah.
Then I started thinking, my dad's like, well, what do you like? Is there, like, outside of like knives, is there anything you like? And I was like, well, I guess I always liked, like anything arts. Like, I always loved drawing. Like I said, any kind of sculpture type stuff. I've always been kind of into that. And so he said, well, like, do you have any interest in like teaching or anything? And I said, I guess, like, the only subject I really enjoyed all through high school was my high school art classes with like we had a really good art teacher there. And I said, if anything, I could picture myself kind of being like him, because I think that must be a decent job. So I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'm going to go to university and become an art teacher. And so, but of course I was kind of like, still like in touch with this girl. And I was like, well, I really want to go to Calgary because that's where she is. But my parents like, well, I mean, you can go to Regina, is like an hour and a half from here. And it would save you, I think that it was a weird program with teaching, because I think it used to be like you can go to university for 2 years and become a teacher.
Okay.
But now it's changed to like you need a degree before you can go into education or something. So it's like 6 years to be a teacher, which is for the pay. And I guess that's crazy. Like, and so I signed up for a joint degree program in Calgary with fine art and education. So it was basically like you save a year. So you go for 3 years and do fine arts, and then you go 2 years education, but you don't get either degree until you finish both. And so I moved to Calgary, and I was in university. And then that's when things really sort of got me on track with the whole knife thing, was because there was a knife shop in town that a buddy of mine owned. He owned a shop here and one in another city close to here. And then he opened one up in Calgary, and he's like, and he sort of got us into the very first gun show that Rob went out, and where I sliced my hands open. That he's like, oh, you should come to this gun show and stuff, because he had a knife shop and would set up there, and we'd just sit and hang out with him all day and in his knife shop in Saskatoon when we had time. And so anyway, he had this shop that he opened in Calgary, and he said, well, if you're going to school there, he goes, why don't you can work the knife shop there? And I was like, okay, perfect. Like, that's perfect side job. I'm around knives all day. And then he's like, and if you ever make anything, you can sell it through the store as well. And I was like, well, that's a pretty sweet deal. So,
right.
When I got to university, I got to be really good friends with a few of my profs, and then the guys that ran the metal shop and the wood shop. And so they just gave us the codes. Me and about 2 or 3 other buddies, who were really into art and sculpture and stuff, and doing their masters and this and that. So we just basically sat there all night, and I would keep my grinder in a locker, and I'd bring it out at night and set up in the metal shop, and then just make knives like all night. And then every project I had, like in university, in my art programs, like a sculpture class, it was like, okay, you got to make something out of wood and something out of metal. So I built a Japanese sword, and I carved the scabbard, and I wrapped the handle, and I forged the blade, and that, like, anything that I could fit knife making into a project in school was just an excuse for me to like not have, it's like make me realize I don't want to be in school. I just want to be making knives.
Yeah.
And so there was another guy in town in Calgary there that ran a knife shop, and I would go visit him once in a while, and he's like, "Oh, you should really come. There's this guy named Brian Little, and you know, you should meet him. It'd be like a really cool thing for you to do." And I was like, I said, I can't afford to take any Damascus courses and stuff that he was putting on. And he's like, okay, well, something to think about, you know, down the road. And I said, I'd heard about Brian Little a little bit, but just the name, like I didn't know much about him. I kind of missed out on a thing. So I'm going to back this up a bit. The first time I moved to Calgary, and I came back home before I decided to going into university to being a teacher, I remember my dad saying to me, he's like, well, when he's kind of like, what do you want to do? And I said, I've always liked building stuff. And I said, maybe the one thing I said, I didn't think there's such thing as a full-time knife maker, but I said, you know, maybe like making jewelry, like really high-end jewelry I'd really like. And so my dad set up an appointment for me to go to ACAD in Calgary, and they have a jewelry department. And there was a guy named Charles Luton Brain who was the head professor. And so my dad called and set up an appointment, and I went and we met him just to kind of say, hey, like, this is what I kind of want to do. Is it possible? And he said, well, so we met the guy, and he said, do you make jewelry? And I said, no. And I said, but I do make knives. And I showed him one, and he goes, well, why aren't you making knives? And I said, because I can't make a living doing it. And he goes, well, I know a guy named Brian Little who, he makes knives, and he's, you know, at the time he was probably 60 plus years old. And he said his whole life he's been making knives. And I was like, well, that sounds really cool. And he goes, well, you should go meet him. And I remember him saying, he goes, but he's kind of a bit of a character. He goes, he's a bit eccentric, and he's, you know, he goes, just ignore that. And, you know, just tell him that I had sent you. And I said, oh okay. Well, and I was
buckle up, Kirby.
Yeah, I was, I don't know, like I'm a pretty somewhat of a shot. Like I don't like confrontation, and I just thought to myself, so what? I'm going to go walk out to this guy or drive out to this guy's house and show him a knife, and then what? Like what? You know, like I can't. I'm sure he won't like be taking on apprentices or anything like that. So anyway, so I said, okay, well, that's good to know, and I'll take his number and stuff. But and that's when I came back and then went to go, and I signed up for university. I'm like, well, I'm just going to kind of do this, and I'll keep making knives. And then my friend Roland, who ran the other knife shop that I was telling you about, and he's like, he goes, you should make some Damascus, and Brian puts on these courses. And I said, man, I can't afford it. I said, I'm struggling to get by as it is with rent and all that kind of stuff. And so then a lot more time goes by, and he's like, calls me up, and he's like, you know, we had a guy back out of this Damascus making course, and he said, I'll tell you what, like, if you make me 2 knives, I'll just pay your way to the course and whatever. So I was like,
wow,
that was kind of how I got it. And I took this Damascus making course and started talking with Brian a little bit, and we got to be pretty good friends fairly quick. I would get him to do a lot of my heat treating and stuff like that for stuff that I made. And then he said one day, he's like, why don't you just come work out here, and rather than setting up at the university all night and stuff. So any chance I got, I would just be like driving out to his place and stuff. And he's like, you know, and then we got to be really, really good friends. And he said, why don't you like move out here, and it would save you a bunch of money and stuff. And I never did do that. I said, as much as I would love to, I just thought, like, I don't want to start sort of overstaying my welcome. Like, you know, having, it's like, okay, we'll go work in the shop all day and then come in and sit around together all night. Yeah. I thought it could be a recipe for disaster. And plus I was still taking university classes and stuff like that. So it would have been a lot of driving and whatnot. But I remember I spent like every second I could out with him, you know, and it started out with him showing me a lot of different techniques. And like, it was the first time that he was like a full on mentor that taught me so much with, fit and finish and how to do things that were different from anything I'd kind of learned up to that point. And then he's at one point, after working with him, he's like, why don't you, there's a Canadian Knife Makers Guild. You could join that. And they put shows on in Toronto, a couple times a year. And so I was like, okay, well, that sounds exactly what I'd like to do. And so he took me to my first knife show. And at that point, a lot of the people, like his sort of customer base and stuff, like I said, he was a very private person. He had a sign up in his shop that said like private lessons or something, like $10,000. Like it was something astronomical, because he just didn't want to be bought. Like, so many people were constantly calling and it's like, oh, can you teach me? And he would put on courses once in a while, like the Damascus thing. But then it was like, as far as like a one-on-one sort of apprenticeship mentor kind of thing, like everybody had been trying, a lot of different people in the area, but he's just like no interest. And for myself and him, it just kind of worked out that we both started really enjoying each other's time, and he enjoyed teaching me, and I couldn't have been more ecstatic to learn from him. And so he took me to my first knife show, but by that time, a lot of his customers had heard about me through him, because he had been talking about me and stuff. And so as soon as we got to the show, it was like all these people just came in and bought everything, because they're like, well, if he's teaching you, like so many other people have tried. And so right from the start, my eyes just like lit up, and I was like, I would have never thought I could ever sell anything, let alone something that was actually like, back in the day of selling, give me like $25 for this knife or whatever, and
right.
And so now it was like, these are like real price, like real money is being made. And that instantly like planted the seed in my head where it's like, okay, this can actually be a living maybe here. And so I was in university at that time. I was getting close to the end of my third year, and then having to go into the into the education program, which I was not looking forward to at all. Like, I love the art. I love the art history classes. I love the sculpture classes and the drawing and the everything I love. But now it's like, okay, now you don't get to do anything but sit and write papers. And I was just like, that's the whole reason I didn't ever want to go to school, was because that was like the opposite of what I wanted to do. And so I remember going to a couple knife shows by that point and starting to sell knives. And so I phoned up my brother and I was like, I think I really want to just drop out of school and make knives. And so my brother's like, well, I guess call mom and dad, because I was too scared to say anything to them. But going back to supportive parents, I said like, hey, I'm really enjoying this. And I think that I can actually make a go of it. And they said, okay, well, like, pack up and move home. And if you can't do it within a couple of years, like, you can always go back to school or anything like that. And so I remember that was it. I dropped out of school and said, okay, I'm going to move back to Wynyard and set up a shop and if I see if I can make this work. And as soon as I got back, we were looking at different shop spaces and stuff like that. And a buddy of mine from the city here where I live to this day, he called me. He's like, oh, you're moving back. That's so great. We'll have to hook up and hang out and, party and stuff like that. And I was like, right on. So I came into the city one day and he's like, and I told him what I was doing. And he's like, well, why don't you just work out of my garage? And he's like, I don't even use it. It's just whatever, right? It's basically a big empty tool shed. So I was like, okay. And so that's kind of what happened. And then fast forward till now, I've been doing it ever since. And,
wow.
So, but when I did move back, and I was going to say, like, one of the things that I think, like, with a lot of knife makers that are doing, kind of doing part-time knife making, and then they build up enough of a following or get enough orders and they kind of transfer over to doing full-time. for me, it was kind of like, okay, crap. Like at that time you were cutting edge if you had like a website, like there's, there was nothing, right? So building any kind of following through Instagram or Facebook or anything like that was just not even like, there's nothing like that at all. So I was like, okay, well, this is going to be tough because you can advertise in a magazine that comes out once a month. Other than that, how are people going to know about you? But like I said, I ended up having a friend who was a web designer and he was, kind of set up and then it was just going to this Canadian Guild show and building up a little bit of a following so I don't know. When I moved back, I needed to buy equipment though too. I wanted to get some more tools, and the only thing that I had that was worth any money at that time, I actually had a 69 Charger, a 440 69 Charger that I sold for $7,000, I think.
Wow.
$7,000. And, but I got my milling machine from that and a couple, a handful of other things. And so that's kind of the one thing that stings, but at the same time, it's like, I remember when I sold it, I was like, well, I'll always just get another, as soon as I save up a bit more money, I can get another one. And now it's like, no, not even, not even.
It's not a thing.
Yeah.
Sadly.
So in those days, what were you carrying? You had to be carrying some sort of knife. What were you? Did you buy any knives at all? Did you have anything like that, or?
I remember the first real knife that I bought. Like I used to go to this knife shop called the Cutting Edge here, right when I was like at the time of starting to forge out swords and stuff like that, and looking at like Spyderco and Benchmade stuff, and I was like, "Wow, that's so cool!" But it's like, "Whoa, it's $100 for that." That's a lot of like, and I'm used to seeing like, like I said, we always had these little $5 pocket knives around the house that I always carry since I was a kid, and I'm like, I would love to have one of those someday. So I remember my parents bought me a Spyderco police model with fully serrated blade, and I remember getting it and I was like, whoa. And I was like so scared to carry it that because I didn't want to lose it. And of course, I don't know whatever happened to it. I never carried it anywhere, and it's probably somewhere still sitting in my parents' house, but I've looked everywhere. But there's a classic thing. It's like, I don't want to lose it. I don't want to lose it. And then it was like, oh, it's gone. And so after that,
I'm just going to throw this out there. Have you checked the couch? You never know what you're going to find in there.
I've checked actually, but yeah, no luck at all with any of that. I like literally ripped the house apart. So I don't know, maybe somebody swiped it or something. I don't know what happened, but and so then after I lost that one though, then I was like, well, that's it. I just love that knife, and I was, I'm going to buy like Spyderco. I just loved Spyderco stuff. And I remember buying the knife I carried the most at that time, when I was like, my first real knife that I carried and used, like, it was a Mike Walker. And I don't know, man, I can picture it in my head, but I don't know if there was like a certain name for it. But I remember it being a Mike Walker, and the size of it and the shape of it was like the coolest. And I used that forever. And I don't know whatever happened to that knife either, unfortunately. But I remember I've had that, and then a number of Spydercos and stuff after that. So, and then I remember thinking like, seeing some really sort of like some of the fancier Benchmade stuff, and I was like, oh, I'd love to have something like that someday, but I just can't. I don't have the money for it. And so that's when I remember right at that time, I was like, I'm going to just start making folders. Like I got to figure this out, and once I started playing around with that, it was kind of like I'd usually carry something that I was trying to make that didn't quite turn out like I had hoped, but it was, as long as it didn't open in my pocket, it was always that. And then I would usually, every time I'd build something kind of that I liked, I would just I've always sort of carried something like that for a number of years, I guess. But yeah.
So you start with a lot of cord wraps with your beginning pieces? Yeah,
like I said, like even to this day, like the stuff that when I go to a show, like I love seeing all the knives and stuff, but when I go to something like Blade Show, like the one thing that I really, really like search for and stuff, it's like looking at the Japanese swords. I just love the look of all the Japanese stuff. And so I tried to kind of incorporate that into a lot of the earlier stuff that I did, was a lot of the cord wrap fixed blades. And I remember at one point, this is going after, Daryl Ralph, I remember, was one guy. When I first started doing shows in the States, I was introduced to him through a friend, and I was buying a lot of materials, I think at the time, from like knife kits that Daryl at the time was running with a guy. And he he used to build a lot of like the Balisong stuff. And I remember he's like, well, can you cord wrap Balisong handle? And I found all this small cord, and I did stingray. Like, the thought of it to me now, I would just have been like, no, that seems like too much, too much work for like, cause it wasn't even my piece, right? Like, it was just something but at the time I was like, oh, I'll do it if you give me a few bucks here or whatever. But I remember back to one that was a cord wrap Balisong that had stingray inlays, and I managed to wrap it like, it was a total nightmare to do, but it turned out really cool. And I don't know, I've never seen pictures of it or anything, but, yeah, I don't know. Sorry, I was again veering off a bit, but with the cord wrap stuff, I even now I really enjoy doing that kind of stuff. I just don't do much of it.
Yeah, same here.
Cord wrap Balisong is a trip. I'd love to see what that looked like.
Yeah, I again, it was like, it's like my whole youth of like, you know, the skateboarding and the this and that. It's like, if we had iPhones and stuff back then, all the cool, like, we're lucky I have like a handful of pictures from stuff back in the day. And it was the same with the knife stuff. I wish I had pictures of all my earlier stuff but there was just no digital cameras and no cell phones. And that was one of those things where it was like, when I think back, I'm like, that would have been cool to see again. I have no idea where that would have ended up, but
yeah, it's really cool, Kirby, to hear. It's clear that your parents, like you said, super supportive, and not just that, like, really, it seems like trying to help encourage you find what really, you know, strikes home with you, right? Like what motivates you, and kind of what makes you want to go do something, right? And it's an interesting time, right? That you're walking very quickly toward with your own son, right? Where it's like, I went through this with my son, and it was a struggle, because I'm like, okay, here's the things I know are going to get him lit up, and they didn't. And I'm like, what? That he doesn't like exactly the same things I do? How is that possible? Right?
Yeah.
Like, it was very foreign to me. And it took a long time for me to kind of get my head really in the right place to just, you know what I mean? Go with it. And it's not easy.
Yeah.
So.
I love it. I absolutely love it. I mean, I've tried to do that with my boys. I hope I was as successful as your dad seems to have been. You know, coming from the opposite side, my parents kind of had my life career planned out.
Yeah.
And I didn't follow that. And even like right up until the end, I feel like I was a disappointment to my dad, you know, I mean, and it's just kind of a weird thing. You know, I absolutely love what your dad did for you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, one other thing, I remember when I like, he would go to the library and look for books to bring home to me and stuff on knife making and whatnot. And when I told him that, I said, I really want to get into making swords. And I said, like, I don't know who or how, you know, and I remember him sitting down with me and writing letters to some of these books that we had gotten out of the library, and there'd be like addresses in them. And we would just send these letters saying, hey, I'm looking to be an apprentice, like whatever. And I remember, like with the Japanese sword stuff, like I remember writing letters. I don't know where we would have sent them, but I remember him sitting with me and just being like, let's just, like, what's the worst thing that can happen? Like, you don't hear back, or they say no. And so I remember the one thing, like I said, the first knife magazine I bought Scott Slobodian, and every time that they've had any of his work in the magazines, I would just I'm just blown away. And so I remember writing a letter to Scott Slobodian, saying, I love your work, and, you know, with the swords and the Japanese culture, I'm just like fascinated with everything. And your work is just like blows my mind. And kind of, I don't know, I can't remember at all what the letter said, but it was basically like, I'm really looking for some sort of apprenticeship or courses or classes if you're willing. And I never did hear back from him, but I think it was I don't know if it was the very first knife show I did in the States was in Las Vegas. And I remember he had a table there, and I walked up to him and I talked to him, and just, it was like, to me, it was like, I don't know, like meeting your biggest, like, I was just like, I was all like nervous to even talk to him. I was like, I can't believe I'm actually seeing him in person here. And I'm looking at his stuff that I've only seen in pictures. And so that was like one of the coolest memories for me. And I remember saying to him, I said, you probably get a ton of letters and a ton of what, you know, like, people wanting stuff. And so I said, I was one of the guys that wrote you. And I just said, like, I'm just the hugest fan of your work. And at this time, then I was like more into doing the knives and stuff. And I was kind of going in a different path, than the sword thing. But like I said, to this day, it's like the sword stuff to me is just, I've got probably 7 or 8 different wakizashis and katanas in the shop that are at different stages and have been for years and years. And every once in a while I tinker away a bit, and I'm just like, someday I'll get one of these finished. But, yeah, Scott Slobodian was like a huge influence to me in the beginning. And the cool thing was that, when I got to be down the road, I got to be good friends with like Bob Terzola and Suze and stuff like that. They were very, very close with Scott. And even this, when I was in California just a couple months ago or whatever, talking with them, and they keep in touch with Scott and his wife and stuff like that. And I always I love talking to them, because I mean, he doesn't really make any swords or anything anymore. So yeah, it's nice to talk to somebody who's still in contact with him, and it's still, it's just, I don't know. Like I said, his work to me is I would just love to find a piece. I've seen a couple online for sale here and there, and hopefully I'll be able to snag one of those sometime when I see the perfect one. That
I think probably we were looking at the same magazines at the same time, because I can remember his work being in quite a few of the fighting knives and different magazines, and they were just so clean and so, like you said, inspirational. They were really cool.
A few years back, he had a book that he did, of a collection of a book of all his works and stuff, and I got a signed copy of that I still I don't know.
It's a cool book.
Yeah, it's like just his photos, like he would the setups
composition
of everything.
Awesome.
Like it was just amazing stuff. Like it just totally stood out to me. And when I see it, like I said, every month or so, I'll be going through stuff, and I'll always pull that book out and just be like, and I get that exact same feeling I had like back in 1991 when I first saw it. I'm just like, oh, and it just makes me want to go work. So, so it's like, which is, so.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Sucks about getting older and being super critical of like your work anymore. It's like, I've done the same thing as you. It's where I've started and stopped swords and different variations and been pissed off at them. But like any sword I bet you have in your shop now, if you showed it to young Kirby, he would be fucking blown away.
That's totally it's funny you say that, because my friend Rob, I've kind of been talking a bit about Rob Waite. He and we met in like I said, it was grade 9, grade 10. We played in bands and made knives together, and we've remained best friends to this day. And he makes some amazing stuff. Like he is auto body guy by trade, but he has always been making knives and stuff. And he he makes really cool forged, all kinds of, like blacksmith forging like twisted steel with carving sets and stuff. And then he'll make just cool daggers and swords. And he does really amazing stuff in so many different areas of bladesmithing, I guess. But, we always laugh because there was a time when we first got our forge set up and we were trying to get like Hamon lines and stuff. And we're like, oh, it's just not working. And of course, at the time we're using like 5160 and 01 and stuff. So it's like, well, looking back on it, it's like, okay, well, that's not gonna, no wonder it's not working. So, but we had tried forever and then different oils and then trying it in water and breaking so many blades. And then I remember the one time that it was like, oh, look, there's like a perfect Hamon line here. And it was like, man, it was like celebration, like you wouldn't believe. And then over the past few years, I've been doing a lot of you know, the odd folder blade or a number of fixed blades with Hamon lines. And they'll come out and I'll be like, I'm not quite happy. And he always laughs because he's like, do you remember that? Like, it wasn't that long ago that we couldn't even get it, like a line across the blade. And it's like, you should be pretty pumped with what's, you know, and so, but yeah, it's funny because we always kind of laugh about stuff like that. Yeah. Just thinking like, yeah, like if you could show kind of what you're doing now to like the kid you who was dreaming about this stuff, it's always a pretty neat feeling.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you mentioned that first sword that Rob showed you, that was kind of a big aha sort of moment, right?
Yeah.
How and where did he make that? Did he have a place that did he have a forge or was he doing it somewhere else? Or
honestly, I'm almost positive that they had a big wood burning stove in their house, and I think he would forge it in like he would like stick it in the stove and start bashing away on it and stuff. And then it was shortly after that when we met that Al Baki, who ran the rock shop.
Yeah.
He did a lot of blacksmithing and forging, and he showed us he's like, oh, you can make a forge out of a peanut butter can. And he would show and he had like this peanut butter jar or whatever, like a can with a propane torch. And he's like, check this out. You can heat treat your own stuff. And and so we learned a lot from him. And so shortly after that, we built a couple forges.
Yeah.
So
what year do you think it was, Kirby, that you started trying to work out the folder thing?
That would have probably been somewhere mid to late 90s, I'm guessing.
Okay.
Probably late 90s. Because I'd have to double check. I know I remember the first time getting stuff in Blade magazine and stuff was like maybe around like 2000, early 2000s and stuff like that. I know American Handgunner, I met them one time at the Las Vegas show and they wanted to do an article. I'd have to go downstairs and check the date on it, but I'm sure it was around 2002 or 3 that would have come out. And at the time, so, and at that time, like if they were, if they were in there around 2003, I'm guessing I had to been trying to tinker and get them to that point since sometime around the late 90s, maybe.
Okay.
I think, again, I'm late 90s, early 2000s for sure at the very latest. But, so yeah, it's been a long time.
Longer than it seems like, right?
Yeah.
There sure as shit wasn't much information about folder making then. Where did you get like any information from?
I remember, I think probably a huge thing would have been that Mike Walker that I bought, the Spyderco. It was a liner lock. It had a plastic handle with a inset stainless liner. And it was right at that time that I remember seeing Greg Lightfoot's work. He had a knife called the Predator, and it was in that one of the first fighting knives magazines I bought when I was like, that is the coolest design I've ever seen. And when I went to the knife shop where my buddy ran in Saskatoon, he had a few of Greg's customs that he had. And I remember that would have been the time when, again, so the whole liner lock thing, I remember I would go into the store and just sit and hold that knife and stare at it for like the whole time I was there, trying to figure out how to make the backspacer and what's sort of, I could see all the parts and it was all seemed fairly basic, but how to get them to go together right and sort of stuff like that was, I remember just sitting and staring at it. So between that Mike Walker and seeing a couple of Greg's first custom folders in person was kind of the time when, and then that was when I was going to university as well in Calgary. And so I just sit in the metal shop at night and try things and throw things in the garbage for a long time until they started kind of getting to work and then working with Brian Little, like he did a lot of his work. I don't know if you guys are familiar with his stuff at all, but he did like some just amazing, like sole authorship. Like he made amazing steel and Damascus or whatever, and hand engraved pieces and sculpted and gold inlaid and setting stones and just amazing engraving, all that kind of stuff. And that's when I first started. I was kind of like, as soon as I started working with him, I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to buy. And my whole, even over this past 10 years, I'm like, every time I go to at the time there was like when they had the Las Vegas Custom Classic, whatever, and they had the whole, and in with the gun show and that, they would always have the big engraving area. And every year I'm like, I don't want to just dump a ton of money and buy a big engraving setup because I can't justify that. But if I go and just buy like the vise, and then I go the next time and I buy the unit, and then I go the next time and I buy whatever, and then one day I'll just have it all and I can use it. And then, but I still haven't done that. And it's one thing I'd love to do. And then but now you try and find the time to do things, and it's really tough. That's one thing I really struggle with because there's so much I want to do. Like even going with the Japanese swords and stuff like that. It's like, I would love to do that. And I find that I get caught up in it. And I get like, even I'd say probably about 6 to 8 months ago, I did a bunch of, I just went online and I'm like, so I kind of go down the wormhole of like looking at different materials and Stingray and this. And so I've been buying tons of stuff. And then I ordered these DVDs from Japan on like crazy different wrapping methods and so, and I just and then next thing you know, I'm like, I haven't worked in like 3 or 4 days and it's like, crap, now I got to, and then I'm panicking to get stuff done. And I've got like my whole plan for TKI this year. I have this one Tanto with just a gorgeous Hamon line. And I've been, I've forged some Habaki stuff and been making fittings. And my whole plan was to take this really totally done up over the top Tanto, totally traditional, whatever. But then I spent so much time on it. And then I'm like, now I don't have time to do my other stuff. And I don't even know if it's all going to work out. So I got to panic and start working on that. And then it gets sloughed aside. And then a few months will go by and I'm like, I'll kind of get into it again. And then it's just this struggle of finding time. And I'm sure you guys can definitely all relate. It's like when you're starting out, it's like, well, if I need to do this and I need whatever, I'll just go work some extra hours in the shop and put in as much time as you can and as much as you want. And then you start, you get a family and you start having kids, and then people are, parents or whoever, they're getting sick and elderly and going through problems. And it's like, now I don't have time to do what I need to do, let alone,
right.
Like it's such a, I don't know. I find that to be a huge struggle and where it's like, I want to do so much stuff, and I get just as excited as I was as a little kid with like wanting to do things, and it's just, there's just no time, and it's really frustrating.
Yeah. I still get pulled on a lot of side missions, as I like to call them.
Yeah.
That don't end up paying off usually.
Yeah.
Right. Distracted by an idea that you got to see happen.
Oh yeah.
I disagree, Michael. I think they do pay off for you. Even if they don't pay off right then, the fact that you followed an idea and it doesn't work, or how to make it work in the future, is a big thing. And I think a lot of us need to take more time to do that.
I think more side missions.
Yeah, like the big picture is, I guess it's all great because it's inspiration and it's helps fuel creativity and all that stuff. Even if you don't get fit, like I don't know, like I know for me, it's like there gets to be times where it's like you're doing stuff you have to do, but you got so much stuff you want to do, and then you kind of get in a rut, and then you just say, screw it, I'm going to push this aside and I'm going to go with something that may never get done, but it totally reignites that fire of like, okay, now I can get back and get excited because I don't know. And something good always comes out of something, even that doesn't work out or whatever, I find usually, or maybe that's just me trying to justify it.
I think the igniting the passion again is worth the time away from making actual money sometimes.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're burning out.
Yeah.
Which is easy to do, right? That's true in every job.
Real easy.
I mean, but in you guys' world, it's maybe turned to 11, right? Because in most cases you're working by yourself, or, you know, it's not like there's other people to pick up the slack while you're not making money or something, right? So there's like interesting trade-off. I'm sure if Abby listens to this and she hears Tom encouraging you to head off into the weeds.
No, I fall for those things. It's like the engraving. I've wanted to do that with the class being in Emporia, but I know good and well I would come back with wanting to buy $8,000 worth of engraving crap to put like little squares on it. You know, I know me too. So,
dude, I've bought the engraver and the tools. I just haven't taken the class. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
it's all sitting next door.
There you go. Buddy mission.
Team up, awesome.
Go take it together.
I don't know that that's something that I would ever do a lot of, but it's cool, you know? I mean,
cool to do every once in a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially on a special piece, right? Like a bid piece or, you know, a TKI piece or something fancy, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at some pictures on Brian Little's kind of old website, Kirby. He did some very tasteful, very nice engraving work.
Yeah, he was it was fun to watch him work. And I mean, like I said, I can't say enough good stuff about him as far as being a teacher and a mentor and just such a good friend. And I've got to be, you know, really close with his family. And when I had no family, where I was living in Calgary going to university, it was like, I felt like a part of theirs. And that was huge. Like it was, you know, you start missing home and stuff like that. And so they helped out in way more ways than just, you know, helping me learn to make knives better and stuff. And because I know if it wasn't for that, there's no way I'd probably be doing what I'm doing right now and living the life I am now. It's like, yeah, they're just, and I mean, he passed away, I think it was 2016, I believe, which was, it was tough. Cause like I said, he and I kind of lost a bit of contact, like when I moved back here, and then I, you know, he's about an 8-hour trip away from here. And then I, you know, having a kid and all that kind of stuff, you kind of lose, you know, you think, oh, it'd be just nice to go and hang out again and stuff. And then, yeah, and then he passed away, and it was a really sad, crappy time, because I was really hoping to take my kid out there and stuff and
yeah,
whatever. So yeah, he did amazing work. He is actually, I was telling you like how he had that sign up in his shop that was basically to deter people from asking if they could, you know, do anything. And so he oftentimes, you know, he wouldn't answer his phone when he was getting ready for shows and whatnot, because he'd be getting, like I said, at that time, there wasn't, you know, there was a lot more phone calls than there is today. You know, like back then it was, you either wrote a letter, or maybe, you know, there's around the time of email and stuff, I guess, but mostly like just snail mail, and lots of phone calls of people like inquiring about stuff. So it was always kind of like, okay, well, no, Dad's in the shop, Dad's not home, Dad's busy. Like he's not spending time on the phone. And so he got a call one day, and his wife picked up the phone, and his kid was in the other room, and they picked up at the same time. And this guy's like, he's like, "Hey, I'm in town, and I'm interested in buying, with custom knives, and I'd love to come see the shop or whatever if possible." And he's like, "Yeah, my name's Brad Pitt." And so his wife was like, "Oh, he's busy. He's working for a show or something. Like, he can't come to the phone right now." And she had no idea at the time who Brad Pitt was. And so,
Right.
but his kid, I think, was on the other line and heard, and his kid had known who Brad Pitt was. And he's like, Mom, I'll go run to the shop and I'll get Dad or whatever. And so he got on the phone. And so, like, it was during when they were filming Legends of the Fall. They were filming that right around his place. And so he ended up, Brad Pitt came out to his place and had dinners with him and stuff. And they got to be pretty good friends. And Brad he had bought a ton of knives off of him during the filming of that. And, I think if I'm not mistaken, I think, like, cause Brad Pitt was really into knives, and during the movie, he went up to one of the guy who's made the prop knife in the movie and said, like, "Hey, do you make knives, or I'd be interested in buying some." And the guy's like, "Well, I don't really, I just make props, but I know this guy, Brian Little, you should give him a call." And so that's kind of how that came about. And then, he ended up buying a bunch of knives from him and giving a bunch as gifts to like Anthony Hopkins and whoever's in the cast of the movie. And then from that, you guys are kind of talking about movie knives and stuff. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the movie The Edge with Anthony Hopkins and Alec Baldwin.
Saw it in the theaters.
Yeah, well, that Brian Little made the knife in that movie, and it came out of when Brad Pitt bought a knife for people in the cast of Legends of the Fall. He gave one to Anthony Hopkins, and Anthony Hopkins, when they're doing The Edge, they were saying, "Oh, there's this pocket watch and a knife that are going to be in the movie." And he said, "You got to get this guy to make it." And they ended up shooting that movie by his place, and he's in a couple of the scenes and stuff, I believe, as well. And so the pocket watch from that movie, that's all hand engraved. Brian did all that, and he also made the folder for the movie. And I think they had to make 3 different ones that all look the same, but like a sharp one and like an unsharpened one and whatnot. But yeah, so that's,
yeah, he for sure did a cameo in that. He's on the deck, I think, when they come back.
Yeah, I think I think if you don't have the widescreen, I remember at the time when it was like out on VHS or something, and it's like, if you don't have the widescreen version, he gets cut out. And if you have the widescreen version, he's on the side there. But yeah, and I just miss the guy. He had so many good stories. He talked about, like, while they were filming that movie, and all these people were just like freezing, and he's wearing all his, like, clothes you need to be wearing in the mountains there and stuff. And just different, I don't know. There's just a million stories. I don't want to ramble too long about any of that, but yeah, he did some just amazing work. And the first folders that I made were very similar. Another guy that I have always, that was Stan Fujisaka. His knives, I just loved the look of, and a lot of the first folders I did were very similar to that, sort of that size and style, just a really simple, sleek, elegant kind of folding knife. And I had done some where Brian had done the engraving, just little hints of whatever. And again, it's like one of those things I know on an old computer I have here that doesn't work. I'm hoping I should take it in, because I know there's some photos on there, and there's one folder in particular that had a blacklit pearl inlay, and then a little flower engraved where the pivot screw would have been, and then it was a full Damascus scale and blade, and it was just a really neat piece. And it was shortly after that I was like, okay, now I'm going to go with the carbon fiber G10 and bead blast kind of look at that time. And it couldn't have been further from the opposite of what I was kind of starting out, like, with folders and stuff. Cause when I was working with Brian, he did a lot of, like, the really amazing little, just tiny little, they're always lockbacks and stuff. But just like really jeweled and engraved and pearl inlays and stuff like that. And I was really having a lot of fun with that. And I would play around with his engraving setup from time to time. And that's when I was like, oh, I got to do this. And then it was just kind of like, I don't know, there's that thing where it's like, well, I really like the look of the tactical stuff. And it was, you know, like it was definitely a lot less time consuming. I know I'd be working with Brian and he'd be sitting working on this one folder for like, you know, a couple of weeks of just sitting and engraving and fitting and making, like I've never once made a lockback to this day. And I remember watching him doing it and I was just like, it scares me more than anything that I started doing the liner locks and stuff. And then there's a point when he saw me doing them and he's like, oh, that looks pretty slick. So he started incorporating it. And it was at that time when it's like, he's kind of my mentor and he showed me so much stuff. And then there was kind of a point where, when I started showing him some stuff and it was like the most surreal feeling. Cause it's like, I've learned so much from you that you want to know something that I'm doing that, you know, like that he had never done before. And it's same with the Japanese type, the wrapped stuff. He saw me doing some of that and he's like, you know, that looks pretty cool. Can you teach me how you did that? And this, and it was, I don't know, it was a real special time being like, you know, someone that you look up to and who's mentoring you. And all of a sudden they're coming to you and to teach them stuff. And it's just, yeah.
Yeah. Full circle, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
That's really cool. What did Brian think when you kind of went off in that tactical direction? Was he like, yeah, good for you, go for it? Or did it, I mean, it wasn't his thing, clearly, based, at least looking on the gallery stuff that, you know, that's on the website. I mean, I guess, although he did do some more laid back stuff, right? But
it was quite different from stuff that he did. And I think he never, I don't know, we never really talked much about it. I know that like, it was something where, I mean, he had been making knives his whole life and it's like, you see shifts in now that a lot of us have been doing this for some time, you see sort of trends come and go and, you know, whatever, big knives are all the rage and everyone wants a big knife and all of a sudden all the tiniest knives are, you know, and you kind of, over the years, you see things kind of come and go. And so when the whole sort of tactical thing started and it kind of, I think he was always very, it wasn't him, but he, I don't know, like he thought it was, he didn't have anything bad to say about it ever, or anything. Whereas I know a lot of people sort of that, whatever, it was like, oh, there's the great turds and they're, you know, and that's all that's selling at shows and no one's buying my stuff. And I remember when I was first coming to shows, there was a lot of very mixed emotions amongst people and then there was the huge thing about, well, you didn't make, that's not sole authorship, so it's crap. And that's one thing that I really, you know, like with like if there was a time when it's like, well, if you had a Damascus bladed knife, you better have made that Damascus. Right. And then it kind of turned into, you know, like guys like Chad who were like making phenomenal, cool stuff and guys that started specializing in making, and then there was this turning point where it's like, well, now it's like, it's even cooler that you're using Chad steel rather than like if you know, and it was like a shift that way. And now it's cool to see that it's like everybody's just accepting to everything. It seems like now and if you're doing like sole authorship, it's awesome. But if you're not, it's just as, you know, it's awesome as well. Whereas before, when I was starting, it was like into the folders and stuff and the whole sort of tactical thing started. It seemed that there was a lot of grumblings. I remember being at Brian Little's place once and there was like the Knife Maker Guild thing where I think a lot of guys were, it's like, well, you're making these tactical folders. You didn't make those screws. So and in order to be in the guild, you had to, you know, you had to make every part. And if you have a CNC or whatever, you can't, it was, you know, like the whole,
you had to make the CNC.
Yeah. And it's like, well, it's kind of came down to that. So I think a lot of guys just said, okay, fine. Well, we don't need this and we'll go off and do whatever. And I don't know. I remember there being a letter from somewhere saying, because I remember Brian reading it to me, he's like, check this out. And where it was like, if you did not make the screws in this knife, you cannot sell the knife at this show, because this show is and it was like, whoa, like it's like, well, where do you draw the line? Like, did you make the sandpaper that you, well, if you didn't, like, I don't know. That's the one thing that that's baffled me with the whole debate of all that, where it's like, well, CNC is cheating or this, and it's like, well, no, it's not. Like, it's just something. There's just different ways of doing things, but like,
it's the hardest cheating ever.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, like, and it's like, well, what about like, oh, you can't get stuff water jet cut, and it's like, well, then, but you can cut it on a bandsaw. Okay, well, why is that fine? Like, I didn't make the bandsaw. Like, I don't know. But I'm just glad to see that it seems like the way the industry is now, it just seems like people are accepting of, they just want something cool. And as long as you're not saying one thing and doing another, like, you know, like if you're not trying to pull the wool over anyone's eyes, but it's like, I don't know. Like, I just think it's just great. That's the one thing that's nice to see. It's changed from back in the day.
Yeah. That's one thing we've talked about a bunch, right? Is the, call it truth in advertising or whatever you want to call it, right? Do your thing, do a great job, and be honest about what you're doing, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And if you're doing that, then good for you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So what was like your, I guess, forum experience? Like, you'd already been making for quite a bit by the time the forum stuff came around.
I remember, I mean, I would go on Blade forums a little bit, and I never really signed up for a lot of that stuff. Like, I would go on once in a while and read stuff, or if someone, like, I'm trying to even remember how that worked with getting like a notification of some way, or if someone would maybe just say, hey, someone posted something about you or something. So I'd go in and I'd like respond to it, but I've never been a huge forum person. Once Instagram started and stuff like that, I really kind of enjoyed that. But the forum stuff, honestly, my biggest fear with all that, and even with Instagram and stuff now, it's like, maybe not so much Instagram, but like, it's like, I guess like I've never been the etiquette part of stuff. Like especially when the forums first happened, it's like, you'd see someone get roasted for something, and I'm like, I don't even know what's going on. Like, what, you know, or if somebody tried posting something and it's like, oh, you can't post that here. And it always scared me because I'm like, I was so scared to like piss somebody off or whatever, that I kind of scared away from it. And then when the Instagram stuff started, I really enjoyed that and whatnot, because it was like, it made sense to me. But now, like I said, the whole like technology side of things, I've always been nervous and more scared of than excited to learn. And I think that I kind of feel like a bit of a dinosaur now with a lot of that stuff. But every time they change something, it's like, why did you have to change it? I just got used to the way it worked before. Now you're adding these other features that I don't know how to use them or what they mean or whatever. So yeah.
Yeah, you're not alone in that, Kirby.
I get mad.
There are people in the discussion right now that share that concern with you.
Well, and that's like another thing too, with like talking about like Instagram and stuff like that, where it's like, there was a time when I posted I kind of got in a bit of a rut. It kind of like, I injured my hand a while back, and I was about almost a month and a half where I like couldn't work, and so I didn't have much to post, and I was kind of in this sort of rut of like somewhat panicking, going like, I need to be making money somehow, and I can't work. Like, I sliced a huge chunk off my thumb, like doing dishes at a plate break, and I just looked down and there's this half of my thumbs in the sink, and so I crazy glued it all up and stuff. But it was like right around that time, and then there was I don't know, like bunch of family stuff and just trying to deal with things. And next thing you know, I'm like, holy crap, I haven't posted in like over a month. And it was like this panic of like, oh crap, I haven't posted. But then there's also kind of like, I don't know, it's just, everything started getting kind of weird, and I don't know how to describe it, but I'm trying to get more into posting now and stuff, but I also see like lots of times if I'll like open something up or like on Facebook or whatever, and I get this sort of anxiety where it's like there's this whole world that's happening without me, and should I try and jump in on stuff or not? But then it's like, and then as I'm sitting there stewing about things, and then I'm like, I should just be working because there's not enough time in a day, it seems, to get stuff done. And so then I get into this thing where it's like, crap, I should be posting more, but I got to get the stuff done. And then I see other people posting lots. I'm like, well, how are they finding time to post stuff all the time? And then I don't know. It's this constant, it's a struggle for me that's never been there up until fairly recent, where it's like, okay. And then it was this weird feeling where it's like, I didn't post. Now I'm feeling weird to post because it's been so long. And I don't know. It's just all kind of a weird time right now for me with all that stuff. And I'm trying to make it all balance out again. But yeah,
it seems like every maker has a different approach with that stuff, right? I mean, Tom has a Facebook group that's of really decent size, right? That has a very engaged audience, and he goes and makes a morning post every day, right? Like, yeah, you know, hey, here's a selfie with me with my coffee mug of the day, and here's what's happening today, and here's the music I'm listening to. And I for him, that's really cool, right? I mean, I like seeing it. I look at it every day, and it helps him, I think, feel connected to his customers. And I'm probably speaking too much for you, Tom, but
no,
that's
exactly right. I mean, Kirby, I feel the same as you a lot of the times. Like, it's like, I feel like I'm doing a bad job on my social media. And a year ago, I was like, man, because it was like random. I would try to post stuff here or there or whatever. And I was like, I'm going to be intentional about this, and I'm going to figure out a thing. And this is like my morning thing. And it's like, you know, I'm listening to music every morning. I post that, what I'm listening to. And, you know, I drink coffee every morning, and I've got a mug collection that's I think kind of cool. So I just kind of make a post on what I'm working on for the day. And then I'm done, and I can engage a little bit as needed. And for me, that takes a lot of the stress off, and just by being intentional about it, you know, and that's really what, you know, it's good. I think my customers like it, you know?
That's kind of a thing. Like, cause I used to do I'd post certain things that I wouldn't think much of. I just post them like, okay, cool. And it's like, all right. And then after, when I kind of quit posting them, like, I should just post this. And I'm like, well, why would I post this? Like, and then I start questioning stuff. I'm like, well, no one's going to want to see it. Like, just weird.
But they do. I post a shot of my bench almost every day, and it's so crazy what people see, right? Like, I truly believe they blow it up and look at shit, and it's like the random shit they come up with. It's like, oh, look, over there in the corner under the dust, and behind that there's the tip of this, and it's like, is that a blah blah blah?
Yeah. Well, and that's what I was just going to say, is that, like, there's certain times like I should just post this, and then I'm like, people think that's goofy if I post it, which I never used to think of before until I had this sort of spell of not posting. And then it's like, no one will want to see that. And if anything, someone will make some remark that'll drive me bonkers all day, of like making some stupid thing like, why would you post that or something? And so then I just don't post anything. But at the same time, I got to realize that, like you say, like, you post a picture of your bench every day. I love seeing stuff like that. So it's like, I get
tools and
so
I'm pretty sure they figured out I'm a goofy dipshit by this point, so I don't even have to worry about that anymore.
That's long since established, Tom. Don't you worry.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I don't even have to stress about that anymore.
Yeah.
Hell, my wife posts pictures that are like, I don't know what the hell, but
usually it's of Tom at least partially naked.
Well, I'll be like without naked, a shirt or whatever, and then she puts these smiley faces over parts that makes it look like I'm naked, and then makes people like Birch awkwardly zoom in on my business. And
see, it all works. It all works. You had some interesting experiences with that, right, Michael, where you were posting knife pictures and shop pictures and stuff, and then you started posting, right? Hey, I'm out looking for fossils with the kids or something, right? And And I think you had some of the same question, right? About, hey, was anyone going to care about this? And I think your experience was that people actually really enjoyed that stuff, wasn't it?
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm neurotic as Kirby is about all that shit. I'm like, well,
Dude, I saw you.
Same
I
thing where
saw
I'm
you.
like, should I post more? Should I post less? You know, and then I'm just like, I don't care. So it's all really irrelevant.
Dude,
I
saw
snapped
you
something as I
dive
walked
down
past.
And get that crawdad.
What's that?
You dove down and got the crawdad. You were the hero.
Well, that was a cool dad moment right there. I'd post that.
Exactly.
But other times it's like I think your consistency is what matters on yours. It's like they know it happens every morning, and mine could be any time of the day, so it doesn't really matter. But at the same time, it's like I also just got to work too. You know,
And that's why the early morning consistency for me makes it easy, because it's like if I don't do it first thing in the morning, I forget. I start working, and by the time I look up, it's 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
no, that works great for you. But then being neurotic like I am, I'd be like, well, I can't do that because Tom's doing that. So mine's going to be the 9 o'clock snack time when my kids are in bed and they don't see me eating snacks. I'll post a picture of myself.
Right.
You know, it's yeah. So I just kind of just keep on doing stuff.
So how do you guys deal with, like, do you ever get the feeling of like, well, you got to respond to every person kind of thing? Or, cause that's a kind of always thing that I've never thought much of until recently. It's like, okay, well, if I respond to this person, then I have to respond, you know, and it's like, I feel bad because it's like, I don't know. It turned, all the social media stuff has really kind of gotten in my head lately. And then it just gets to the point where I'm like, I'll just post it tomorrow. And then I kind of, you know, and then you blink your eyes and a bunch of days goes by, and it's all because of like, well, if I don't respond to everyone, I don't want to upset anyone. And I, you know, like it's this neurotic thing of like, I don't know. It's just something that never used to be there. Now it's like kind of lingers in my head and I'm just like, crap.
That's the issue, I think, with how we work and the type of job we do, with customers having extremely easy access to us as far as DMs, PMs, emails, and whatever. And I don't think people think about it. They'll just send something off, but when we get it, it could be a Sunday morning and be like, well, we need to answer this because we're here. But there should be boundaries too, and we should take them seriously because that is part of our like mental health that kind of we need to start standing by, because otherwise it does build up and you start going, you know, this kind of cycle of shit, I'm not answering fast enough. Did I answer that? Oh, I'm gonna hold off and I'll do it later. But because there is no 9 to 5, there is no shut off, you know?
Yeah.
And so you answer all of them, but then you're like, or if you don't answer fast enough, you feel bad, but we really shouldn't, I guess. There should be boundaries.
I personally almost never answer anything on the weekend unless it's like personal, like somebody that I know.
Yeah.
And I try to answer everything, but I think customers also have to understand, hey, be the squeaky wheel a little bit, because the volume is crazy sometimes. And I try to answer, but when I'm also working, so it's like, you know, I might be in the day, check my computer, and I got 15 messages or something. And it's like, man, I just don't have the bandwidth at that time to answer them. And then the next day I've got 15 more, and, you know.
Yeah.
But I also know me, and I know I'll look at that because I've done this many times where I'll look at it and be like, I'm going to answer this when I have, you know, time to really think it out. And
you forget
whatever,
to
and then
mark it
it's
in
gone.
red.
Yeah.
Out of my memory.
That's
Yep.
That's another thing that, I mean, with all the social media stuff, it's like, it can be so good, but it can also be so bad. But the one of the things that stresses me out is like, there's so many, you know, you get a message on Messenger, you get a message on, you know, so many different platforms. And it's like, I just wish there was like one thing where they just funneled into one and I can just go but between email and that, like you say, like I run into that problem a lot where it's like, I'll look at it and I'll be like in line, you know, shipping something or whatever. I'm like, okay. And then it's my turn. I'll put my phone away and I'm like, I'll get back to that later. And then you skip over it. And then it's like, you realize a week later that you didn't respond. And it's like, oh, I don't know. And then I guess one thing that I always really admire people who are like, I don't care. Like if you like, I'm kind of doing as best I can. If you don't like it, screw you, whatever kind of attitude. But I'm the kind of guy that's totally just like, oh, it eats away at me. It's like, I feel bad for stupid shit that's like, I got to just snap out of it. But like, there was a thread the other day where it's like somebody was saying something and it's like, he's like, said something about like, the only crying I listen to or something is if it's my kids or something. Other than that, everybody, you know, like kind of thing or whatever. And I was like, man, I admire that because I really wish I could just feel like that because I just wish I could
say that. I don't know if a lot of people actually can pull that off. And truthfully, I you know, people are like, well, you shouldn't take it personally. Like, well, this is a job we did because it was a passion. So we take it very personally. Yeah. We put everything into this job. And like a lot of people do, but I mean, it's our art or whatever you want to call it. So yeah, we take it very personally on all aspects. So it's easier said than done, you know, to be like, oh, I don't give a shit. Well, yeah, I guess the older we get, we tend to be a little bit better at not letting stuff bother us so much, but it still does. Yeah. You know, and we're trying, but man, it gets tough sometimes. We're just inundated. And I know you guys have had the same thing where you're like, you know, you have someone who asks a question and you're trying to find out which avenue they approached you. So you go searching through your emails or your PMs or your DMs or whatever the hell, your texts and be like, how the hell did they contact me?
That can be very confusing at times. Mm-hmm. I try to keep my business to Facebook. I still get a few customers on Instagram. If possible, I try to refer them to Facebook because it does get very confusing. There's so many different ways to reach out: email, Facebook, Instagram, text, whatever.
And a lot of the questions are like stated on my website. You know, there's answers to them and stuff. Yeah. And I'm like, it's right there. It's go there. It's different. You know, I remember when I was excited about, you know, a maker or something, I'd look up their website, I'd read all the shit on there. Yeah. You know, I would come prepared. It doesn't, I think it's just too easy to not have to worry about that anymore.
Yeah, they got the hotline. Why would they bother reading your website?
Yeah.
At least that's what it feels like, right?
Sometimes, yeah. For sure. So no, Kirby, I don't think you're alone in that sort of stuff. And I think it's, you know, I mean, I'm not as old as you know, for sure. But excuse me, but
wow,
older maker, and seems like a lot more moving parts to this whole thing than there used to be. It's a juggling act sometimes.
I think it comes social media and the computer and all that stuff comes very easy for a lot of the younger makers. But like you guys, I'm an older maker and it's been a struggle, but I think we're doing okay. All things considered.
Yeah, I'll keep doing it till they don't let me anymore. So, and that's just what I say, and that's the attitude I have to take, you know. So, doing the best I can.
Yeah, I think that's the trick, right? Is to find where's the healthy spot where, you know, the beauty of it all. We've talked about this lots of times on the show. It's not free, but it's basically free advertising, right? It's free relevance, and that is valuable if you need it, right? And you can argue about how much of it you need and how much you don't, and I don't know that there's one right answer, right? There's plenty of successful makers that don't do social media at all or do minimal amounts of it, but some people really enjoy it, right? At least it looks like they enjoy it because they're heavily involved in stuff and spend a lot of time on it. But I don't think that has to be the answer necessarily, right? It's free advertising, but it's not really free because it's your time, right? I mean, yeah. And some people have like a formulaic thing that works for them, right? Like Tom with his morning thing, it's kind of a ritual deal, and his fans of his work expect it, right? If Tom shows up late for his morning post, there's people saying, "Where's Tom?" Yeah, right. Did Tom get hit by a bus or something? What's going on? Right. Yeah. So, but it's cool because it's also keeps in very tight contact with your customers, and but I don't know that you have to have that It's just it's another relatively low investment tool to basically market, right? I mean, that's the reality of it. And so I don't know. I've talked to a couple other makers, Kirby, who've asked me that question, right? Like, hey, I don't really have as much of a social media presence. It feels like I'm missing out. Am I missing out? I'm like, I don't know. What's your goal, right? If your goal is to sell, 100 knives or a couple hundred knives or whatever a year, then maybe you're not missing out. But a lot of people that are heavily invested in social media are doing a lot of stuff like what Tom has been doing, which is a bunch of merch sales, right? Like coffee mugs and t-shirts and patches and gear, right? And if that's piece of what you want to do as part of your business, then that's where I think where stuff like a social media presence really comes to be helpful, right? Because you can kind of tease that stuff. You can get people interested in it. You can actually feel stuff out, right? Like, hey, did it seem like a lot of people were interested in this? Maybe I'll order 100 shirts instead of 50 shirts or whatever. But that's not everybody's game, right? That's, for a lot of people, is kind of like the pain in the ass part of it, right? I don't want anything to do with that. I want to make knives and do my thing.
Like I said, for me, it just turned, it used to be, you just wouldn't think of it, but now there's like this shift of like, with Augustus being the age he is, and it's like, going back a few years where it's like, I just post stuff all the time and did this and that, and then I'd respond to everybody. And now it's like, it's all just a time thing, a time management type deal where it's like, now as soon as he's done from, home from school or whatever, it's like, okay, we're going to go out to the lake and we're going to do this and this and this. And then it's like, I get caught up in doing that and I missed out on whatever, or else I did that. And then I feel bad for not responding. Cause normally at the time I'd be, like before he was the age he is. I guess for me, it's all like a time management thing and trying to deal with fitting things in. Cause it's like as soon as I start working in the morning, it's like, I want to like block everything else out and just work. And then if I open my phone for something and I see something going on, I'm like, oh, there's this whole other world. And I'm like, I should be doing this. And then it turns into this whole mind thing. And it's just like,
right.
And then, like you said, like, oh, I'll get back to this later. And then it's like, well, later now my later is, going and playing mini golf with, or doing like lots of family stuff. And especially with the summertime and that. And it's like, oh, and then I start really stressing while I'm working, going, I should be posting more stuff. And it's like,
dude, you'll never, ever, ever regret spending time with your kids and family.
Yeah.
As long as you're selling enough knives, it's all good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing for me anymore is I'm basically trying to buy time. That's all I'm trying to do is buy time to be able to do the things I want to do with my family.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of customers that get that. There's some that don't. And truthfully, I'm sticking with the ones that do understand it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, you have some family stuff on your Instagram feed, Kirby. And I think if you're comfortable with some of that stuff, I think it's okay, right? You live in a beautiful part of the world, right? I mean, there's lots to see, right? Outdoor stuff is awesome. People really enjoy that stuff. I know Tom shares lots of pictures of outdoor stuff when he goes hiking or camping or whatever. And I would say,
share that.
As long as you don't mind sharing that kind of stuff, let it rip, man. Because I think part of what that does, at least from my perspective, is it reminds people that you're not this knife making machine.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you are, but you're also a dad, right? And a husband and a guy who likes to go enjoy things in life. And I think that's okay. It doesn't always have to be knives. And, people look at stuff and say, oh, well, this post didn't get as many posts as when I showed a fancy knife. Okay. But that's not always the best measure, I don't think, personally. I like the idea of being able to see a little more into that person, because it goes back to that old adage about, buy the maker as much as you buy the knife. Right. And when people can see some of that stuff, I think there's value in it, at least from my perspective as a customer.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, for me, I love seeing that kind of stuff. And I need to remind myself that, of that exact thing where it's like, yeah, just post and go with it, because
Yeah.
I like I said, I every time someone posts a picture of their bench, I'm always zooming in and, hey, what's that over there?
Exactly.
There's
Yeah.
tape measure in the corner. What kind of tape measure is that, or whatever? Right? Like it's like,
Yep.
It's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, bench shots are probably one of my favorite, just because of other makers. I just like seeing how their shop, is laid out, or what is on their bench, or what the tools they use. Because same thing. I'll zoom in and be like, that's a tool I've never, thought of using.
Can dirty their benches. That'd be me.
Yeah, in Tom's case, yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty shocking.
Yeah.
I did buy a new vacuum though, so I've been trying to vacuum stuff up.
Makes me want to go on Amazon and order Tom a broom.
I have a broom. Thank
I'm
you.
teasing. Well, I think, one of the awesome people who does that, and I'm not sure if he does it on purpose. I know sometimes he does it on purpose, is Sal Monero, right? I'll look at some picture from Sal's shop and I'm like, what the fuck is that over there? What has he got going on? And I'm like, hey, Sal, what is that? Oh, yeah, that's interesting. You notice that that's a jig for, he's like got a jig for whatever, right? He's got crazy stuff in there. I think it's fantastic because it's like, what on earth is he doing?
yeah. And Bob Terzola is the same way.
Yeah.
Like I've been to his place a couple of times and I'm just blown away at the stuff that he comes up with and the jigs and stuff he does. Cause I'm totally quite the opposite. Like I just kind of clamp stuff here and there and sort of whatever. And think to myself the whole time going, I should have a jig for this. I should have a jig for this. And I just don't do it as much as I should. And then I see his stuff and it just blows my mind. I'm like, well, what does this one do? And what is it? And it's like, wow, that's so smart. And like how, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Speaking about Bob Terrazula, every time I went to the shop, he was doing he would cut his lock differently every single time because he's constantly fixturing stuff differently and experimenting. It was always kind of crazy how many good ideas he had constantly.
Yeah, definitely.
Like his manual mill, all the fixtures he had like a bookshelf on the wall with all the different fixtures.
Yeah.
Man, we like talking to Bob. That was really fun. We got to come up with some reason to have him back.
Bob,
Talk history with us or something fun. What we have some fun questions that we usually ask. I know Birch has one that he likes. What we got any questions here for Kirby before we start walking toward wrapping it up?
Well, I don't have a movie knife to ask him about because I know what it'll be.
He already told us.
Yeah. I got to know, as far as your making though, what is probably your favorite process of the making?
Huh.
Favorite part, I guess.
It depends on I guess my most favorite thing would be the finishing of materials. I love finishing mammoth and pearl and just bringing out that final stage of sort of polishing or satining certain things is probably my favorite. I think I remember Alan Olishewitz one time talking about, I think it was Alan, that he said one of his favorite things was just cutting stuff on the bandsaw, cutting liners or something. And I was just blown away by seeing that because I was just to me, that is the most torturous kind of thing that I don't like doing. But on a similar note though, I really find almost therapeutic is drilling drilling out liners. I do stuff usually just off a jig or whatever. And so I'll clamp and spot all the holes and then I'll just sit there and drill and just hammer through them. And to me that somehow I really enjoy that part of it. Grinding blades, I don't enjoy until it gets to the final stages. But the coarse grinding of just hogging material off, that's probably my least favorite thing, but all the finishing is probably my most favorite thing.
Is it because it's just the nastiness of it, or is it because you're going to mess something up?
I think it's the dirty, the big long, just the sort of chunks of like the dust that comes off it. And it's just dirty and sticks to things, and you're pressing on stuff hard. It's kind of like you're sort of boring through. I like more light, delicate processes of doing things, I guess. Which, I mean, and going back to the whole forging thing, it's like I just admire guys who sit there with a hammer and bash things out, because when I first started and we were forging out those wakizashis and stuff, it was so fun for like at that time. But if I had to do that now, like I would just sit and want to cry. Like I just can't imagine, like, you know, just the really dirty, like really bashing of stuff and being hot. And I always admire guys like Chad who sit in front of a forge all day in Mississippi. I couldn't even be in Mississippi and survive, let alone standing in front of in front of like, I don't know, just the hottest air blasting. I've gotten too delicate as I've gotten older.
Kirby's accustomed to that Canadian air.
It's either always too hot or too cold here.
Yeah.
So,
Tom, you have a question?
Early on when you were talking about like growing up and stuff, we generically covered that you had some knives and stuff. Did you have a specific knife that you had at the time that you loved, or one that you lusted after, or anything like that?
Like you mean like is there something that I like as far as like
yeah, something memorable that you carried, like a specific knife, or like a marbles or Schrade or anything? Sorry, there's a train idling right behind my shop.
Oh, I wondered what that was.
Yeah, it's like rattling the building, so it's awesome.
Like I said, like when like going back a lot of years, it was like Spyderco. I had a lot of Spydercos and I loved them. I would look at certain things, maybe not so much production stuff. There was nothing production that I thought like I had to have that I really, but like when I started seeing custom stuff, I was like, I've always really wanted one of Lightfoot's knives in the beginning. And then
he's also from Canada, correct?
Yeah, he lives in Alberta. He's about a 5.5, 6 hour drive from me.
Okay. Yeah.
But I don't know. I think I've always wished I would have gotten one of Brian's, like a really fancy folder. I guess out of anything, I would kind of lust after that the most, on so many levels. For one, had I not even known him, it probably would have been one of the knives I would still feel the same way about. But then after getting to know him and like being part of his family and stuff like that, and all the memories and stuff, like, you know, when he passed away, I was just like, I've got a couple pieces of his, one that we sort of built together, and then one other fixed blade of his, and that's like, I just wish I had one of his folders and stuff, but yeah, it never really happened. But so to this day, that's probably out of all the knives, it'd be like the one that I would lust after the most.
Very cool.
What about you, Sean? Do you have any questions?
Yeah, man, I bummed some knife protectant lubricant off you at TKI, and all the guys who got those knives was like, what was that stuff? It's awesome. So answer the burning question. What the hell was that stuff?
I'm trying to remember, actually.
You had it in a little bottle. And
was it kind of a yellowish color?
Yes.
Maybe, yeah. I got that from Alpha Knife Supply a lot of years ago. It was some kind of a nano oil, they told me. I honestly don't know the name or brand of it. They just said that at the time, they said, you got to try this stuff. It's awesome. It's a nano oil, which I don't really honestly know what that means, but I've heard of it. I've heard the term being used a lot, but yeah, the Alpha Knife Supply, whatever, I'm sure they probably still carry it, I would think.
All right, cool. Dude, I remember when they started offering that stuff. I actually think I know what it is now.
Okay.
I think it's actually, there's a branded stuff called nano oil.
Nano oil, yeah.
Yeah,
it's kind of a clear yellow.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like all the time on detents is actually called nano oil that I have.
Yeah. With the little wire tip kind of thing, applicator. Yeah.
Little syringe
Quite a
applicator.
bit.
That's good stuff.
They have 5 different weights, or 3 different weights: 5, 10, and 85.
Look at Tom. Whoa.
Maybe
Toot,
they're
toot.
going to leave. They've
Training
been sitting there
Friday.
for like 5 minutes.
Don't they know you need to put a on-air neon sign pointing out toward the track so these people understand what's going on?
No joke.
Okay, my question is, Kirby talked about playing music and playing in bands and stuff. Yeah. So, what's your favorite guitar, Kirby?
Favorite guitar would have to be Les Paul. 59 Burst would be nice if anyone ever wants to give me a gift. But yeah, no, I that's the one thing that, like, as far as like collecting stuff, I mean, I have a handful of knives from friends, like, over the years that I tend to like to, try and get stuff from people that I have memories with and we built friendships with and stuff. But the other I collect probably more guitars than knives at this point, which has been, I mean, I've been playing guitar since probably about grade 7 or 8. And, yeah, sorry, I'm starting to ramble on here. I'll just say, probably Les Paul. I've got a few different ones of those. That's probably my favorite guitar.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely my favorite as well. So are you still actively playing, like, with a band or?
Yeah. We still, I mean, again, that Rob Waite that I was telling you about, he and I have been playing together since grade 10 or so. And to this day right now, we're playing in a band together. And we actually put on a thing a few years back. It was kind of like, it was for like our 40th birthdays, and a friend of mine had a place. He's like, why don't you guys come jam out here and we'll set up a stage and do all this. So we kind of made it was kind of like a goofy, sort of a novelty type thing that ended up turning out to be like really, really cool. And so we kind of started doing that annually every year. And then a few years ago, we're like talking to some people and saying, like, we should do like a knife deal thing where it's like, cause there's in Canada, like there's been way back in the day, there was the Canadian Knife Makers Guild, and there was, shows, and it was kind of a big thing. And then it kind of dried up. And, but then in the last few years, all of a sudden, it seems to be so many people in Canada, like, buying really, really like high dollar knives and having these amazing collections, which I'd never ever seen before. And so I said, to talk to a few buddies, and I said, we put this show on every year. It's like a big outdoor thing. We set up a huge tent and a stage, and we play, and there's bonfire and food and everything. And I said, we should do it and have like a knife get together thing during the day. And so we started organizing all this stuff, and people were going to come out from like all over the place. And it was going to be this really cool event. And then the whole COVID thing kind of hit, and it was like, oh, we got to put a stop to all that. But yeah, we still play, as much as we can and stuff. And it's a lot of fun. Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome. I think it's, I don't play as much as I used to, but it's always been kind of a, good mental health thing for me. Like I don't, I get a lot of stress with work stuff and whatever. Or like you said, sometimes family stuff going on, or ain't no drama like family drama, right? Sometimes not anyone's choice, and sometimes seemingly weirdly on purpose. And it's nice to just plug in and play some really loud music and enjoy it, and things just disappear. I really like that.
That's exactly what it's kind of been for me, is that it's like the one thing that I kind of do that it's, it's like makes me feel like I'm in grade 10 again. And it's like, everything just goes away. And, like you say, like any kind of stress or whatever, it's like, we'll just pick up a guitar and sit and rock out for a few minutes. And it's like, oh, that solved a lot of problems and stuff. And now that Augustus is getting he's every once in a while I'll see him picking it up, and that's like, I don't want to force anything on him, but I sure hope he takes interest in it and stuff. And if not, there'll be some happy pawn shop with all the stuff I leave to him. I don't know. Cause I just think, like, when I was like I said, my parents, they didn't have any musical instruments or anything. So, I just hope that with all the stuff I've been fortunate enough to accumulate through, even in the knife world, like, meeting people who are into guitar and whatever, it's like, you start swapping and trading and whatever. And next thing you know, you got all this cool stuff that I just, like I say, I hope that he takes an interest, because had I been given anything like that, being a kid, it would have just been like amazing. But
right.
Maybe it's also a curse as well. Maybe the whole thrill is having to find all that stuff on your own too. So we'll see. I don't know.
Yeah. No, very cool. Both my kids ended up with interest in that kind of stuff after being around it for long enough. So I wouldn't be surprised at all. So yeah, that'd be really fun to be able to do that with your son. My son plays a little bit, and it was always cool to be able to play with him. My daughter, somewhere along the way, I don't know why, maybe COVID era time, was like bored, and I'm like, I should get a ukulele, which seemed weird, right? Because I wasn't really into ukulele music other than going to Hawaii, and we loved it there, right? So it's like, okay, this is kind of cool, and it's something joyous about that sort of sound. And so I got a ukulele, and then my daughter's like, hey, that doesn't look that hard to play. I'm like, no, it's super easy to play. You want to play one? And so got her one, and so now she fiddles around with that. So it's kind of cool.
That's awesome.
But
I know.
good. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I should say it's just stuff that's good for your soul, right? So I'm happy for them when they find stuff like that, because they get that same kind of good feeling about it.
Yeah. And it's neat to the amount of people and stuff. Like, I find that it's always kind of mind blowing that, as you all know, with like all the knife stuff, it's like people who are into like the knives, you find a lot of people who are, of course, interested in pens and guns and watches, and it's all part of whatever. But that's the one thing that I've noticed so much, is that how many people that are as well into guitars and stuff, and like talking to people at shows, and that's always been a really cool thing for me. Like, I had a guy in California, his brother or something was endorsed by, I can't remember the name of the guitar and stuff, and we just sat and talked about it for hours, and it was just a really cool thing. But and then I think, Mark, you and I talked about different projects and stuff like that, and the one project that I've kind of got going on, that I was gonna talk a bit about, because it's starting to look like it's going to happen again. But before COVID was, a friend of mine, a customer of mine, had worked at a number of the different guitar companies and stuff, and we started talking about doing a combo collab type thing. And so with Martin Guitar, I'm going to be doing a guitar knife combo thing.
Ooh,
really?
Yeah, and it kind of came about a long time ago, and then it was supposed to happen like in time for a NAMM show and stuff like that, which is kind of like the SHOT Show of guitar stuff. And then again, the COVID thing kind of hit, so everything kind of, it's like no point in releasing it at NAMM, because NAMM's been canceled and whatever. So, so I've been in talks with them a bit lately, and so that to me is a really exciting project, because that's like the best of all of the stuff that I've always loved, like all the different worlds of whatever. So yeah, I
super fun.
Thought I'd throw that out there.
Yeah, definitely keep me in the loop on what's happening with that. We'd be happy to talk about it on the show.
They need to throw in a custom deck also.
Yeah. No
Guitar, a deck, and a knife. It's like that'd be perfect.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Last question, Kirby? Where did the spider logo come from?
Oh, good question.
That is a good question, because I've been asked that a lot, and my answer for that has always kind of been, because I honestly like have to ask myself, because I remember back, I remember talking to Greg Lightfoot one day, and he's like, if you're going to make knives, you got to have a cool logo. And I said, okay.
Nice.
And so I sat there and I was thinking, I'm like, well, what could be cool? And I remember I had these different sketching ideas of scorpions and a couple other, I'm trying to think what else there was. I think it was kind of came down to a scorpion and then a spider. And I went with the spider because as a kid, I've always loved like Spider-Man and stuff, I think is a huge part of it. Another part of it is that I love looking at spiders, but I'm also extremely terrified of spiders. Like if there's like a glass case, and whatever, I could just sit and stare at them, like I just think that's watching them spin webs and stuff. And so, yeah, there's that whole kind of, I think the biggest thing would probably be because I loved Spider-Man as a kid, which might sound kind of goofy, but
yeah, that's cool.
But
good advice from Greg with the cool, got to have a cool logo. His thing with the shark is awesome, right?
And I remember in the beginning, one thing that he always said to me too was he's like, you gotta, if you're going to design something, you got to make sure that like, don't try and fancy it all up with materials. He said, you should design something and spray paint the whole thing black. And if it still looks cool, then you kind of go from there. He's like, it's all about the design, not the materials and stuff. And
there you go.
I always get a kick out of Greg. He's always, he's
wrong.
He's got a lot of, I don't know. He's just a fun guy to talk to. If anyone has never talked to Greg Lightfoot and you have a chance to go and next thing you know, you'll realize you've been sitting at his table for 5 hours and just loving everything he's got to say. He's just a really embracing kind of guy who's got neat stuff to talk about. So
yeah,
interesting character.
The knife world has lots of those.
Yeah.
Fortunately, right? Part of the story.
For sure.
Well, very cool, man. Kirby, thanks for taking the time to come on with us.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much. I had a great time and yeah, I'm just thrilled that you guys asked me to be part of this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah, great conversation.
Absolutely. We could have done a 2-parter and I'd have been happy. I enjoyed this.
For sure.
Well, thanks so much, you guys.
Yeah, definitely keep us in the loop on the Martin collab. That's really cool. I look forward to seeing what that's all about. For
sure. Yeah. We've designed some stuff and I've made some of the tuners and stuff like that. So
wow.
It's kind of at the stage now where they're mostly just waiting on the knife. So hopefully I'll get that in the next little bit here. And I'll definitely be posting more about it and stuff like that as it comes together.
Way cool. Way cool. All right. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up here. I know usually at the end, we sometimes talk about folks that in the community that have passed. And I know there was a member of the kind of the collector world, right, that recently passed. When you guys want to talk about that?
Yeah, Craig Martinez passed recently, and every time I got to talk to Craig and hang out with him, he was always just a super cool guy, really nice, down-to-earth dude, and I'm really sorry to hear of his passing, and I feel for his family.
Yeah, rest in peace.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, I think that's it. Thanks again to all of our Patreon folks and to George at AMX for his help. And we'll keep this thing going. We're coming up on 100 pretty soon. We're going to do it before the end of the year for sure. So we got to figure something out. We have to have an extravaganza.
Mm-hmm.
Are you up for an extravaganza, Michael?
I will be by that time.
What did you say, Sean? Clip show?
Yeah.
Phone it in. Yeah, there you go. Patch together a bunch of interesting stories from different episodes. That could be kind of cool. I don't know. That sounds like a lot of
shitload of work for you.
Yeah,
actually, and not a lot for us.
I was going to say that sounds like a horrible editing job. I may suggest we not do that, but
all we got to do is be like, remember that time we talked about, and then it just cuts to you editing a whole bunch of shit.
Yeah. And honestly, with almost 100 episodes and probably 25 mini episodes on top of that, that would be the biggest challenge is the needle in the haystack. Like, where the heck was that conversation?
Yeah, where do you start?
Sounds like a Mark problem.
Buddy, that's for you to figure out, not
We
for
have
us to
faith
figure out.
in you.
Yeah. Thanks, pal. Thanks, pal. All right, Kirby, it was a pleasure. We're gonna sign it off here. Thanks again, man. We really appreciate it, and enjoy your summertime with the family. I got to do it, and hope you able to get out and do some cool stuff outside.
Well, thanks so much.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, seriously, thanks for letting me do this and stuff. It was a blast. And I look forward to seeing you guys at some shows coming up here pretty quick. So
Yeah.
Yeah, real quick.
Hell yeah.
Yep.
So Tom's out. I think I'm out. Michael and Sean, you're both going to Portland, right? And you're going to the Portland show, Kirby?
yeah, as long as the flight gets me there.
Yeah, exactly.
Seeing with all stuff that's going on, we'll see. But yeah, Portland should be a fun time.
Yeah. Awesome.
Cool.
Yeah, I wish I was going. I just can't justify it.
Tom's afraid he'll get taken out at the knees if he goes on a fun adventure without his wife. I don't blame him.
That wouldn't happen.
There's a self-preservation aspect to that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's it. Thanks, everybody, for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks.
Thanks all.
Later, folks.
See ya.
To learn more about our makers, you can find Tom Crine on the web at crineknives.net, in his Facebook group, Crine Knives, or in his Instagram account, at Crine Knives. For Michael Birch, check birchtreeblades.com, Facebook group Birch Tree Blade Works, or Michael's Instagram at birchtreeblades. For myself and the Raygun Bead Project, we're on the web at raygundivision.com. We have a Facebook group called Raygun Division, or my personal Instagram, at msteiner. For those interested in photos, references from the show, or some discussion about the show itself, you can find us on the web at markofthemaker.com, in a Facebook group called Mark of the Maker, or on our Instagram, at Mark of the Maker. Last but not least, the ultra cool and haunting background music we use for the show is a piece called Noir Guitar by Stevie's Amp Shack, found at the Free Music Archive and licensed under Creative Commons CC BY 4.0. Thanks for listening.